Okay.
Yeah, just you have to take off both. Okay, well, I think we're all here. So welcome to Greg's Defense. We're so excited that there's such a room here, and I hope that you'll take this in for a moment of this amazing support system that you have as this long journey is coming to the defense time today, Greg. So how this works is Greg will start. He's going to do about a 25 to 30 minute presentation that lets you know the high points of his research. And then he'll send out all 5,000 pages for you to read in detail later, if you so choose, correct? So we're going to turn it over to Greg to take the lead there. Then you're going to get to ask questions, make comments, anything about the work that he's done on this topic. After that, then you're free to go about your day or hang out and put your ear to the door, whatever you like to do. But during that time, then Greg will meet with his committee, and that will proceed with the defense part. He does have one member of his committee that's absent today, so we want to honor Dr. Jaime. She's out today with a personal thing with her family, but sends much love to you, and I get to give you an extra hug today for her. So I was like, I can do that of all things. So we'll do that. It'll be the defense time. When that concludes, the committee will make those decisions, and then we'll be heading upstairs. We have a bell that when we have new people who successfully defend, they get to ring a bell and be introduced as that infamous DOCTOR word. We can't say it yet. It's like saying Voldemort. So just at the beginning today. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Before I get started, I would like to introduce a couple people, if that's okay. So first of all, I'm going to introduce my friend Ted. I'm already getting emotional, so.
Did we bring tissue? I meant to bring you tissue.
Yes. There's
okay.
So,
just scoot up toward
so, yeah, exactly. So Ted is a longtime friend. If you read my autoethnography, he is Tim in there, so he figures in my autoethnography that I'll talk about here in a little bit. And then the guest of honor is my son Jacob, who has a little bit to do with this whole process as well. So I welcome you guys for being here. And then Teresa and Marcy, glad you guys made it, and I think everybody else knows everybody. So, all right. So my study is called Silent Voices in Session, a narrative inquiry on the lived experience of male clients who identify as gay who receive counseling from male counselors who identify as straight. And it came out of, to kind of give you an idea of how that whole idea came up, basically it starts out with my story, which I'll get into why my story is a part of this when I get into methodology, but my story involves, of course, my son, who at 21 called me on the phone one night and said, "Dad, I don't care what you say or do, I'm tired of fighting this, I'm gay." And that was, to me, that was his official coming out to me. And at that time, I was still involved in a conservative church, still viewed homosexuality as a sin and as a choice and that sort of thing. So it led to a series of events, without getting into all the details, that eventually led to me going back, getting my counseling, my master's in counseling, and then in the course of that, taking a class on multicultural counseling, kind of had a mind-blowing experience, and my worldview was dramatically altered. And I tell that story, I've had people say, "Wow, that was so quick." It's like, well, there was a 3-year gap in there between him coming out and me going back to school and that sort of thing. So it wasn't like overnight. But it was relatively quick, and when the transition did happen for me, it was a quick thing that occurred. As a result of all that, I began to get involved with LGBT issues, and I ended up doing my internship at a place in South Florida, SunServe, which was a fantastic place for supervision and for doing an internship. It's a training facility in its LGBTQ populations who they serve. And what really led to my question then was my first experience. My very first client came in, and he was completely adamant to know what my sexual orientation was, And of course I tried to explain to him, talk with him, how would that be helpful, and all this stuff. And after some time, he was getting quite agitated. I finally said, well, it's straight. And before I could say anything else, he had wadded up the consent form, threw it in my face, and stormed out of the room, calling me a number of names and on the way out. And there was a lot of issues going on with him, but as I talked to other guys, there's about 2 or 3 other men that I was seeing counseling, who later in our counseling time, my orientation did come out, and it revealed to me that there was a dynamic that was going on between us as gay men and a straight man in a position of power and privilege. And I began to realize, and as I began to think about my dissertation, this was kind of the question that came up to me as what I wanted to pursue. So that kind of gives you why, for me, why the question. And then as far as LGBTQ mental health, and why I think one of the main reasons this is so important is because there's a plethora of research out there that LGBT individuals seek mental health counseling at a greater rate than their heterosexual counterparts. And we may wonder why that is. It isn't because of their sexual orientation. It isn't because they're gay or because they're lesbian or transgender. It is because of the same presenting concerns that a lot of other people seek mental health. Depression, anxiety, substance abuse, relationship issues, suicidal ideation, all of those are very prominent within the LGBT population, as you probably all know. But then overlaying all of that is homophobia, homonegativity, and then the internalized homonegativity that a lot of gay men and lesbians and others struggle with, which is basically when they take that homonegativity, or sometimes it's internalized homophobia. There's a switch in the language occurring right now. But they internalize all these messages that they receive from society and from culture, and internalize that, turn it inward, and it becomes kind of this self-loathing situation that they carry within themselves. And so so you have the presenting concerns, but then on top of that you have these societal issues that just add, kind of exacerbate the issues. And you can look at this as I talk to my participants. All of them could identify with every one of these slides. Isolation, a couple of them identify, one of them in particular, he said the mind-numbing loneliness that he goes through on a daily basis. And just being abandoned from their families. Many of them are cut off from their families, or can't share certain parts of their lives with their families. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit too. So that's kind of why, for me, when you think about that there's going to be, for instance, gay men who have to seek counseling, how do they find counselors who are affirming, accepting, and informed, who can work with them? And so that's kind of drives my research on this. So then reasons for the study. First of all, there's a lot of unhelpful experiences that the literature reports. Men who identify as gay often report counselors who are just unhelpful in a variety of ways. They, in one of my participants, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but one of my participants talked about his counselor who occasionally just tries to kind of do conversion therapy with him, just in the middle of, he'll just try and do stuff. And he, as he put it leads to lively discussions. But he lives in a rural area, and he doesn't feel like there's anywhere else he can go within driving distance to go. And so he stays with that counselor, and the counselor and him have these kind of battles every once in a while. I'll report this now. One thing that came out of this is during the member check, he actually took what I had written to his counselor, shared it with him, and he said, "There's a shift in what's happening with us." So that made me feel really good. I was like, "Wow, cool." So we'll see what happens with that. Literature, Israel in 2008 found that some straight counselors impose their own moral values, their own beliefs, their own choices, even upon their gay and lesbian clients. And then a lot of counselors, and this is kind of surprising, but many counselors still state, and I have 2010 up there, but there's even a study in 2015 that talks about many counselors still feel unprepared to work with LGBT clients. So again, a reason for this study is to just inform people and provide more literature for people to have access to. And then one of the things that leads directly to my study is that a number of previous researchers indicated that qualitative research should be done to gather more information about the lived experiences of individuals who seek counseling from male clients or counselors that are straight. And so, so my method was narrative inquiry. And with narrative inquiry, as many of you already know, but it essentially is what I was looking at for was a lived experience. And narrative inquiry, as Clinton states, is a way of understanding experience. So I wanted to understand from the client's perspective what it was like to work with a male who identifies as straight in a position who is in power, and like I said before, power and privilege over them, because when you counselors have power, and so how do we navigate that, how do we negotiate that? And I wanted to hear from the client's perspective what that was like for them to come into a situation not knowing what it would be like to be with a straight male counselor. When I was at SunServe, one of my clients, I actually did a pilot study with this, and I interviewed him a couple of years ago, and one of the things, I didn't know this when I was seeing him, was he came to the clinic and asked, what his first question at the front desk before he came to see me was, is my counselor gay or straight? They wouldn't tell him. And they actually refused. He asked several times, and they said it doesn't matter. And so he came into our session, his anxiety level was heightened because he had a feeling that he's seeing a straight person. He wasn't sure how he'd be received. And so he was one who later did, I obviously did come out to him later in our sessions. It was a therapeutic moment. It actually ended up being pretty helpful for him. But just understanding that anxiety level, as knowing he was going to be seeing someone who was straight, it raised because in his view, straight men often were viewed as the enemy, basically, kind of unsympathetic, uninformed, and so he just wasn't sure what kind of care he would get. So that's why I wanted to understand from their perspective what this was like, because there is literature out there about, from the counseling perspective, counselors who see gay clients. There's quite a bit of literature on that, not so much on clients who are receiving the counseling. So I wanted to focus on that. Narrative inquiry is about we live our stories. We're storytelling people, and all of our lives we go through, if you think about it, you tell the story of your life, right? And so what narrative inquiry is really about is just hearing the stories of your participants, letting them retell and then re-story their lived experience. And what we do in the middle of that is we find meaning from that. We identify meaning from that. What I did was a thematic analysis, and I came up with my themes that I identified in there, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Autoethnography, I've kind of already talked about that, but the reason my autoethnography is there is because in qualitative research, unlike quantitative, obviously qualitative, the researcher is in the midst of the research. He or she is a part of that. They're enmeshed, as one person puts it, in their research. And so for me, it positioned me in my research is sharing my autoethnography. And then I guess the big thing with the voices, I really wanted to have a marginalized community. I wanted them to have their voices heard. And so that was important to me, to have an opportunity to let the participants have their voices heard. So here's my participants. Wesley, 22 years old. He's from a rural southeastern state. Alex, 31 years old, from a rural Midwestern state. And Henry, 63 years old, conservative Midwestern state, but he lives in an urban area. So a little bit of dynamic there. William, kind of an urban area in a western state. And then Aaron is a 59-year-old from an urban area in the southwestern state. Just a quick note on how I found these gentlemen. I had this grand plan when I started to contact LGBTQ community centers around the nation. I had a link that I could connect to all of them. I connected with a couple, one that I actually knew some people in Florida. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying where, but anyway, to a number of locations, and I got blanked. Not a single one was willing to work with me on this. The ones that would talk to me told me one that they received a lot of requests for research, which I can appreciate, and they just say, we don't do that. We don't want our members to be lab rats, basically. So I appreciated that, but I pursued it a little bit further, begged, and got another phone call with a person, an activities director of that site, who responded very tersely, we don't have anybody that meets your qualifications. And I was like, really? Wow, you have, I don't know, a couple hundred members at least, and none of them, okay, I left that alone. But anyway, I was blanked. And one of the things that came out of it too was realizing that for some of the LGBT centers that are in the rural conservative states, there's actually studies, not many, but there's some studies out there that indicate that because of lack of funding and lack of staffing, they're overwhelmed. And so that actually is one of the things that I see as a potential future area of research, basically. So, all right. I want to talk a little bit about silencing, since it's about silent voices. Wesley just stated, and I talked about this more in the letters that I wrote, but I wanted to bring it out a little bit more. Wesley mentioned that his first counselor was dismissive of his problems, and I see that as silencing. The counselor that he saw, and the first two counselors actually that he saw, simply wouldn't deal with his sexual orientation. They just didn't want to go there. And I don't want to say it's because it was a Christian psychologist. It might just be somebody who didn't feel informed or aware. I don't know. But it was really troubling for him because the things he wanted to talk about, they simply didn't, they wouldn't go there. Alex went to another Christian counselor, and in this case, basically he was told, the message he received was, you're not right with God, you're in sin, deal with that, and then you'll be okay. And that didn't last very long for him. It drove him, as he says, deeper, and led to more issues for him. And then I mentioned the one about going to the conversion thing. He gets some very lively discussions. And then Aaron, Aaron's story probably is the hardest one to read, because Aaron actually was outed at the age of 49. He'd been married for 25 years. He had 4 children, has 4 children, and led to loss of his family, loss of contact with his children for several years, loss of his spiritual community. He went, his first counselor was a straight man, and the way, when he got to him, the man asked him, the counselor said, well, talk to me about gay sex, I don't know much about it. And to me that's silencing, because again, it wasn't dealing with what Aaron needed to talk about, it was dealing with what the counselor wanted to talk about. So those are just some examples I wanted to kind of share about that. So my analysis, I came up with the following 4 themes: coming out narrative, and the importance of that. The family issues, that was something that everyone brought up. Surprising to me was spirituality. Every single one had a spiritual story to tell, and it was just, already. And then experiences with male counselors, obviously we'll talk about that. So briefly, Aaron was very articulate. Well, all of them were. But Aaron, on this point about coming out, he just said it's a big red flag if they don't ask about the coming out narrative. It's such an important part of hearing the story of your client. And if you're, and he talks about it's not just for LGBT, but also even BDSM and that sort of thing, sexual minorities in general, as he called them, need to have that story, talked about. And so we're missing a huge, if we don't ask about the coming out narrative and understand that, we're missing a huge part of their story and not going to be able to provide the help that they may need. Family issues. Alex grew up in a very conservative Christian home. It led him to basically pretend not to be gay for a number of years, and led to depression, suicide, anxiety, cutting, beating, and eventually 2 suicide attempts. And so finally, with him, when he came out, and this kind of goes back into I'll get ahead of myself, but his family still barely accepts him, and they accept him, but it's kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy, you know, let's just not talk about that type of thing. So, and then Aaron just made a really good point that the coming out process, and this is what Jacob and I experienced, is not just for the individual, but it's the entire family. In some way, the entire family deals with this because we as a culture we don't have a way to make this kind of a normal transitional period in someone's life. It becomes this abnormal, even though it's not. It's just not, it's viewed differently. And these guys talked about how when they felt different. But the whole family comes out, has a coming out process. And Aaron's family, and this also ties a little bit into the spirituality issue, his two sons are identified as ultra-Orthodox Jews. And so when they got married, before they even could propose, they had to talk to their dad and say, Dad, you can't show up as gay. You can't bring a partner in. You can't talk about it. Or you won't be a part of our lives, basically. And he agreed to that, of course, but it's definitely a part of his life that is cut off, for him. And he and his partner are getting married soon, so it's part of the family, but it's cut off. So spirituality, like I said, that kind of surprised me. For Aaron, he just talked about the spiritual journey that he's been on since he did come out or was outed, and the changes that had happened. And he realized, I didn't get the whole quote there, but he realized that given the catastrophic overturning of my life, I wasn't really in a position to be the father of my children. He was cut off from his kids for about 4 years, and then 4.5 and 5. They kind of came back in segments. And what he realized was that as hard as that was, he needed that time to kind of learn how to be their father and get through some of his own process and some of his own, coming out and learning to be a gay man, because he had hidden it for so long. So that he saw it as a spiritual journey for him. And as difficult it was actually not all bad. Alex views spirituality, and the reason he stays committed to his Christian faith is because it provides resilience, and the hopeless feeling goes away a little bit. So he sees that the spiritual part of that as a positive. And then Henry's the one that, he's fully involved in this church. He's a volunteer. He works in some of their programs. He really is part of this church. But he says, I know there's people there who would never speak to me again if they knew I was gay. So he's not out to his entire church community. His pastor knows, but nobody else, and he can't come out that way. So even though spirituality was and that's just a small part of what we talked about. So know that. So then getting into the experiences. So Alex, both of his were church counselors, were from a church. We talked about the first one that tried to just tell him, get right with God. His second one, I talked about that too. The second one was the one that every once in a while still tries to do conversion therapy with him, but that doesn't work. And he sees him occasionally. He doesn't see him weekly. Wesley talked about, I guess I did this too. So his experience was with his first 2 or 3 male counselors who were straight was negative. Essentially, they wouldn't. It was just more dismissive. That's the best thing for him. One of the big things that came out of that too is just the idea of building a therapeutic relationship. Those counselors did not, in Wesley's case especially, never took the time to really understand who Wesley was. And just hearing his story, you just kind of, and I get that there's a lot of issues going on with him, but to me it seems like you still need to take that time and get to know the person you're dealing with. And then Henry, it's kind of a long quote, but just the main thing what he was saying was, what he would say to counselors is just be accepting. Now Henry had an overall positive experience with his male counselors. He identified he's in the recovery movement, and his counselors were actually pretty affirming, pretty helpful for him. Where he did have some issues, I guess, is when they asked him to come out to the group that he kind of leads, which I felt was kind of insensitive. I didn't feel like that was necessarily appropriate, but I understood where they're coming from too. There's two, the whole thing with recovery being honest versus shielding yourself and protecting yourself kind of came up for him on that. So, and then William. Now William is an LDS. Comes out of the LDS church, and his experience also was positive. His experience was unique in that he wasn't out yet when he saw his counselor, this counselor. And so they dealt with it from a spiritual perspective, and it was a little bit different, but he did not feel, he wasn't shamed by the counselor for what he was dealing with were temptations, thoughts that were going through his head about male erotic thoughts. And at that time, he didn't identify as gay, and his counselor didn't approach him from that perspective. He just tried to deal with him, helping to identify these and kind of capture those thoughts and toss them out. And what eventually led to him coming out 17 years later was the anxiety that produced in constantly having to stop and, oh, there's a bad thought, gotta throw it away. Oh, bad thought, gotta throw it away, type of thing. And he said it was just like minute by minute he was doing that. So it was, in the end, it wasn't necessarily all that helpful. So implications, I'll go through this real quick. The first thing I see is for counselor educators, is just being able to, being sure that we follow through the K-CREP guidelines, the 8 core areas. The first 5 of those I think are really important and relate to, there's something going on here, so sorry. There we go. There's that relate to really working with not just gay men, but with people of different cultures, regardless of what that may be. So professionalism, ethical practice, social and cultural diversity, human growth and development, and career development in particular, I see as very important areas for us to understand and have an awareness when we see particularly an LGBT person or a gay man, a man who identifies gay, that we identify. Because those are all areas that, like for instance, career development, we still have lots of places in the country where people can be fired because they're gay. So that's an area that we need to be aware of as we work with our clients. And then kind of more in practitioners, just kind of that constant checking of your own multicultural awareness, biases that you may develop. You know, for me, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, I find that I have to do this all the time. I feel like I'm fairly well aware of things, but at the same time, I know that for a long time I lived a certain way and I had a certain mindset, and every once in a while I have to kind of stop and check myself and go, wait a minute, let's think about this, and kind of go back to that multicultural awareness and diversity and that sort of thing. So just constantly being aware of that. I think the awareness of the importance of the coming out narrative is very important. And I mentioned the Therapeutic Alliance, just being able to gain experience, but that's one of the things that the guys did talk about was not having experience, but then they all agreed too, well, how do you get that experience? You know? But so which then you need to build that trust. And I think that sometimes that trust is not built and not established, especially if you come into a situation where someone may not be aware of their own biases against gay individuals. So an empathy, and then creating safe spaces. We talked a little bit about that, how to do that, and then being advocates for your clients. So limitations. I felt that possibly my affectional orientation might influence what the participants might share. I'm not sure if it did, but it was a limitation I felt was there. And then a word that may not be familiar to everybody, heterophobia, actually came up, and that's the fear that some gay men experience towards straight men. And I wondered if that would be something that might be a factor in my research. So, and actually a couple of the participants brought that up as a fear that they experience getting as they relate with straight men. So further research, flipping it. So basically doing the reverse, taking a gay therapist or a therapist who identifies as gay and working with males who identify as straight. And I had a buddy here who does that over the weekend. We talked a little bit about that and his experiences with that, and it was kind of interesting for further research though. So, but anyway, so there's that. Expand it. So I can see this being, like I focused on men who identify as gay, but what about lesbians? What about transgender individuals? What's their experiences? And then just highlighting it. And for me, this is the area I mentioned before the dilemma that a lot of the rural LGBTQ centers experience in just getting funding and having volunteers and being able to deal with the population, which is, even in rural areas, pretty large. So, and then one that I forgot to put on here, I just realized, is the other one I also forgot to put on here was the heterophobia. I think that would, there's not a lot of literature on the concept of heterophobia. And it would be, I think that would be interesting to explore. So, questions?
Let's applaud first.
Wow, I answered everybody's questions.
You can make comments too.
Your
or
comments, yeah.
questions.
Yes.
So I'll make a comment of that I'm looking forward to collaborating in the future, especially because of my own research looking at how counselors experience the sexuality of queer individuals
Yeah.
and how that sort of coincides. And it's interesting that that came up in your research because of that piece of it, that focus on it, which I think is really interesting.
Did I mention one of my participants was an OBGYN before he came in? And so this is just, I'll just add this adds to our need to do research together. As an OBGYN, in all the years of his training, he told me he had 1 hour on sexuality. And then later in his 1 hour. And later in his life, he took a pretty extensive course on human sexuality, but he said 8 years or 12 years in medical studies, 1 hour. Amazing. So, yeah.
So I think I missed, how did you get your participants? You got blanked from.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't finish it, did I?
Yeah.
Thank you. Good question. So when I got blanked from all those, then I went to PFLAG. I contacted them, no response, even though a number of emails were sent out, no responses. I actually got congratulations from some people for doing the study, but nobody said yeah. So that was nice. And then I had, let's see, who else did I contact? Well, eventually what I ended up doing is Kara put me in touch with somebody who, I ended up going on Facebook, and I joined a couple of groups, the Queer PhD Network, and then the other one that I can never remember the name of it. And so I joined those two groups. I did a snowball effect, asked some friends on Facebook, hey, do you know anybody that might fit this? And I ended up with, actually had 6 participants, but one, due to time limitations, there was a lot of stuff going on with him. And I really would like to get his story because it was really compelling, but unfortunately, health reasons and stuff, we couldn't complete it. So, that's how I ended up getting my participants. I got 3 from the Career PhD Network and that other one that I can't remember the name of, and 2 were snowball effects from friends who put me in touch with people. And so that's how. So, which led to then kind of a discussion about Facebook and the new ways to contact and get participants, because social media is, I mean, it was great. Interestingly too, I know I'm talking a lot here, but Wesley, due to some of his health issues, did not want to talk on the phone and did not want to do Skype. So we actually ended up doing Facebook Messenger, just typing to each other. And I was really concerned about that at first. I was like, is this legit? You know, but I needed a participant. So I went for it, and it actually was really good. I think I connected with him at least as well, if not better, with some of the other guys, because we were able to very thoughtfully think about what we were saying to each other. And so we had time. It took 4 or 5 hours to do it, and then we stayed in contact. We had a couple more sessions where we talked later, and all of these too, I should mention that this was not one interview. This was multiple interviews with these guys. So usually 2 to 3 was kind of where I was at with them. But with the Facebook Messenger one, the other nice thing about it was it made transcribing so easy. Copy and paste. So, yeah.
I was wondering if any of your participants had any thoughts about the initial interview or the intake process, as far as what questions they would like their therapist to ask or not ask, or a form to fill out
That's a great
in
question.
terms of identifying and so on.
Yeah.
Did that come up?
didn't really come up. The only thing that came up was make sure that you do ask about the narrative, their coming out narrative and the importance of that. But that's a good question. I'm trying to think if that came up. I'm not remembering anything
Okay.
coming up like that. We did talk about, I think Aaron and I did talk about just the importance of it being able to have kind of an intake that allowed for different pronoun usage, that allowed for not just, we did talk about this. So for instance, married or not married. Okay, that's kind of heterosexist. Let's say partnered, relationship status, different things like that. So that did come up a little bit in those terms. Making sure that we have on our intakes not just male and female, but other, or I don't like other. That's not the right way of saying it, but transgender, and then male to female, female to male. So we did talk about those issues a little bit. So
Okay.
that's good. Took a little bit for that old brain to kick in. I think somebody was asking a question. Oh, okay. No. It's just Christina. Don't worry. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you very much. This was a fascinating experience for me, and I loved it. So, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, once again, thank you for coming to support Greg. So now you get to go about your day, and Greg gets to have his meeting with his committee. Typically we'll do that for about an hour, and then we'll wrap things up. And so if you're looking to come upstairs and join Greg, it'll probably, you might want to be there about 11:15 till 11 o'clock-ish. But I'm really loud, so I'll be yelling up this.